how many people here are devs? Awesome. So we got some here. So, just getting started building on Tezos, what was one of the biggest challenges that you had, each of you, whether it's going through the documentation or learning how to set up a node or whatever it is, writing smart contracts, just your biggest roadblock that you had?
The biggest roadblock, I think, is building on Tezos. But it's a lot better now. Back when I started, there's no documentation. I had to reverse engineer code just to be able to build basic stuff. But I think it's growing a lot now. I think the biggest roadblock for new developers is getting used to the different, Tezos uses different rules to typical blockchains. So kind of getting your head around that.
Yeah, I started blockchain development with Ethereum and also with Hyperledger Fabric. And it was a totally different experience. But yeah, you can try out with liquidity, but I would really advise new developers on Tezos also to learn Michelson. Don't only take the easy route of liquidity or fee. Of course, it's very useful to prototype, but also learn Michelson because you really need to know how the blockchain works.
Yeah, I think I would echo the sentiments that are shared here. I think the biggest challenge we faced initially, and it's changing quite a bit right now, initially the documentation was very sparse, and it was hard to get the kind of help, because I think the folks who wrote the documentation knew what it was, but someone who is coming from outside and reading it, it's like, okay, how does that really happen? But that has changed a lot. I think the Commons Foundation, TQ, and a lot of the other organizations has been super helpful in kind of enriching that part of it. And I think one of the other challenges was just getting more developers into the ecosystem, right? How do you, especially compared to some of the other platforms, when you're trying to build, how do you kind of build your team? How do you get that additional developers? So I think documentation means just access to all the infrastructure plus additional, how do you get more developers into the ecosystem?
That's one of the great things I loved about Tezos in the beginning, was even through all that drama we had in 2017 and everything in the communities, we still had all this big community of devs building the entire time. And they never cared about any of that. Well, we cared, but
no, I think
still building,
yeah.
never stopped, never considered anything else. We knew that the future was here with Tezos.
Exactly. I think even through all those trying times of the initial days, I think it was the community that really helped us along. I think even though there wasn't breadth, there was amazing depth. And if you had an issue, I think someone would just jump and kind of help you out. So I think the community really made the difference for us in the initial days.
Some other blockchains, of course, Ethereum has a couple of years ahead of us and has some good tooling out there to help developers get started. So when you get started building on Tezos, is there any specific type of tool that you would make your life easier as a developer on Tezos that you're either looking forward to seeing or maybe going to build or something like that?
Yeah, so I build quite a lot of tools as well. So for us, we just use those tools, and if there's not a tool available, we just make one. That's pretty much the philosophy.
Yeah, just to have, to start out, that would be just a tool to have a local network on your computer should be easier, because right now it's a steep learning curve still. So a tool for that would really help.
Somebody came out with one of those recently, but I haven't tried it myself.
Yeah, no, I think something like Truffle, something that when I say a tool, I think more like an integrated development environment, because I think there are two phases to the development, right? You have one is how do you initially get the developers started, where you just need to get a few clicks, you see the smart contract up and running, and then you have, all right, how do I dive deeper? So I think to get that initial entry, a tool like Truffle will definitely help. And I think, I agree the users need to know Michelson and what's really underneath the hood, but I think also a high-level language initially to kind of just get people, folks to wet their hands, kick the tires around, and then as you start kind of crossing the chasm into now, let me really build, I think you definitely need to know what happened behind the hood. But yeah, to summarize it, a tool like Truffle or something like an IDE environment, which takes end-to-end development, deployment, testing locally, would be helpful.
And to add to that, the Truffle boxes, where you have an actual template of a project, would really help. Just to start out, then you actually know how the front end talks to the back end, and that can be a real challenge. But that's fixed now, thanks to EasyTC.
Do we have any questions from anybody or any developers here?
Hi, can you talk about how do you guys see the role of a token in your applications? I know tokens have a bad rap on Ethereum because of the ICO, but the truth is also that in many cases, the tokens are a native currency of application and do have a lot of value. Like think of Maker and MakerDAO. Do you have a need for native tokens in your application, or do you just use Tezos? And how do you think about tokens in the Tezos ecosystem?
I'm not really a big fan of tokens. We use the native Tezos token, and we preferably have also users pay our application with Bitcoin, for example. We want to have more access of different tokens. That makes it more simple for users to use your application. And eventually, one token I would like to see is a stablecoin. That would add a lot of value to the Tezos network, I think.
Yeah. So we don't use tokens. Having said that, I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. I think there are business models that require the use of that construct, and there are business models that doesn't. So I think it becomes bad when you try to fit something into something that's just not a natural fit, right? So we don't use tokens, but going back to what Bernd said, I think the need for a stable coin or a stable currency, where once you kind of move the fiat or bridge from the fiat world into your crypto world, how do you make sure there's a store of value that can sustain itself over time is definitely something that I know we need, and I'm sure a lot of other applications would need. And I would also see that more as opposed to stablecoin A, stablecoin B, stablecoin C. It might just be something that is foundational to the Tezos infrastructure itself, and who knows, maybe it's another amendment protocol that someone might put up there.
Yeah, as you said, tokens can have a use. That's just to add to that.
Yeah, I agree. Tokens can have a use, and I'm of the mentality that if there's a demand for it, let's build it. There's a couple of token standards that are floating around for Tezos at the moment, and VR is the company I work for as well. We are looking at launching one too. I think it comes down to ensuring that there's a utility to the token, and it's not just like a Jesus coin or. But I think that kind of fad's gone. We're not going to just see a ton of these coins just being created for the fun of it. But yeah, we still could. But I think it's quite a big issue in the community. There's definitely a big group that want tokens, and then there's a big group that don't want tokens. And yeah, I think from a development point of view is let's build the standard and let's let people decide what they want to do.
And not all tokens are like ICOs, when people think of tokens and they think of some big Ethereum ICO, raise a bunch of money, didn't really need to use the token in the first place. But there's some things going on now too, like TQ made that deal with Elevated Returns and Securitize that are tokenizing $1 billion worth of real estate on Tezos, like security tokens and just real estate assets on the blockchain. And that's another use that you don't need to, it's not necessarily for raising funds for a company or something.
I'm very interested in the business application side of things, and from that viewpoint, I'm not talking about the coding, but more development roadmaps. So Stephen, you shared the 2019 development roadmap for Sony, and kudos, because you laid it out, and it's brilliant. Full and fair disclosure, right after the initial period for when we went public on the beta, I had transposed some digits on my password, and Stephen was good enough to, I don't know how much time he spent, hours helping me. We finally got it sorted, and that's very good. I actually think that's what gave you the idea for Sona. No, I just because I was freaking out because I lost, I couldn't figure out my password. But for you two gentlemen, kudos to you on the Tezos. What is your and for you, what is your development path for 2019 for your product and for your product, so we could get an idea of where you're going with it in 2019, when we can expect to experience it or invest in it?
So we don't do a token, so investment is not really an option.
Are you going to IPO or something? Or?
That's the eventual goal, of course. But we are planning to develop, we already developed multiple insurance products on the AlphaNet, and we want to bring them to the mainnet for actual users to use. And we want to develop also a fully mobile experience. And together with a partner called AirGap, we will enable users to actually pay with any cryptocurrency they want. And we want to launch also the functionality to have users create insurance products.
So one of the main things, at least, and as I might have alluded, I think our transition will be gradual as we start adopting more of the decentralized infrastructure, right? But the way we look at it is, as we have a lot of, let's say, actual asset-backed tokens, including the real estate token, you need to ask the question: what is the future of the broker-dealer platforms look like, right? And so that is where a lot of our evolution would be. What is a broker-dealer platform that enables tokenized securities, right? With the full implication that you're treating it as a full security, and then, but that token is actually resident on the chain. So how does a native platform that deals with these tokens look like from a broker-dealer perspective? So that's one of the key things, at least for us, as we evolve. And part of that also depends on two of the upcoming features within the Tezos platform itself. So for that, we need a zero-knowledge proof. Basically, transaction privacy is important, not just because we need it, but from a regulatory perspective. The other thing is also, I believe one of the speakers early on mentioned, we see a world of multiple blockchains. So there's going to be real estate assets that we have on Tezos. There's going to be some other assets that's probably not on Tezos, but might be there in some chains. So cross-chain communication is something that'll be very interesting for us because, and again, if you look at it, at the end of the day, if a user wants to invest in a real estate or an art token, the user doesn't care that, well, the infrastructure might be powered by Tezos, but at the end of the day, like the users don't care, is this token in Tezos or is this token in Ethereum or Qtum or whatever the blockchain is, right? So I think to truly enable the kind of solutions we are looking at, I think transaction privacy and cross-chain communications would be something pretty important for us.
Hey, thanks, guys. So one of the questions that people all the time ask us is who's building on Tezos, right? So I know you guys have stressed over and over again that the end users don't necessarily care about the technology. They want to care that it works. We couldn't agree more. But what I'm interested in is how do we sell entrepreneurs on using Tezos? What do you think we can do to make people more interested, people who are in your shoes, more interested in using the technology?
So I think, so one of the things that I heard consistently, both what, at least the reason we chose Tezos, and it was interesting, there was the same theme being repeated across, across Bernd and also Stephen and also some of the other developers, right, was the security mindset, the security first perspective, then the fact that there is a way to evolve in a predictable manner, giving it longevity. And there's also ways for the users to kind of enrich the platforms through the proposal self-amendment process, right? I think is really trying to figure out what are the applications that suits it, what sort of developers are building those applications, and how do we kind of reach out to them, right? I don't think we talk a lot about it, or I don't think, or rather not talk, I don't think we reach it out to the broader community. I think within the community, we all know this, and I know there are a lot of efforts that's going to reach out, but how do we push this message out more louder and more broader, right? Because there are a lot of platforms, especially for the kind of things that we deal with, that these attributes are important. So then it is, what are the platforms, or what are the types, nature of solutions for which this platform just natively lends itself, right? As opposed to a lot of the other blockchains. So yeah, so just reaching out and, because the value is just amazing. It's amazing that the value, the reason that each of us adopted, are just kind of consistent. So I'm sure there are a lot of other folks we can start, pushing this message out to.
Yeah, I think there's 3 main parties to kind of deal with that. Is you've got the businesses and the enterprises, you got the developers, and you got the users. And we kind of have to focus on all 3 at the same time. So I think, with the foundation and TQ offering grants and things like that really helps out the developer side of thing, where these developers can, get funded and they'll receive resources to be able to start building, and then they can also build tools as well. So TQ and TF are in a position where they can, direct their funds in a certain direction. So if they want to focus on building tools, they can fund those things. And then I think, like, for me, developers should come first in a way, because I'm a developer, I guess. I want to be able to eat. So, but then you got enterprises, and I think enterprises, there are a couple of ways to do it. But for me, I truly believe that the properties of the Tezos blockchain should attract those bigger businesses. When they see the security model that we're using, the fact that we can upgrade our protocol on-chain using, stakeholders' rights and their voting power. I think that should start bringing on some big enterprises, and we already have attracted some big ones already. And I think that's just going to keep snowballing. And then obviously you got the users, and I think, once these big corporations start, commit themselves to building on Tezos, and they have all of these developers that they can start using, eventually we'll get to the point where blockchain itself is a lot more user-friendly than it currently is. And I think by the time we get there, we'll start seeing adoption rates increase.
I would think to get more developers interested, I should focus also a bit more on the formal verification and the language part, because the last weeks I've been seeing a lot about the on-chain governance part. It's really exciting, but I'm a Tezos enthusiast. But for new developers, I don't know if they're really that interested in that perspective of Tezos, but more in what can it add to my business? What can it add to my startup to develop on Tezos? What kind of value does it add? So I would focus a bit more on the formal verification part.
Yeah, maybe just to add to it, going back to, I think the more we can actually try to get solutions out there, be talking to enterprises, banks, big corporations, because I think that's also going to drive a lot of the demand, right? And as you have demand, then you're going to have developers kind of come in to help out with that demand. Because I think one of the challenges right now is, even though we go to developers first, if wearing a developer hat, it's, for me, one is, okay, I'm going to learn this, the ramp up is a little bit high, and then what, right? I mean, but if there are a lot of supply of jobs that's created by, just take a look at Hyperledger, right? I wouldn't call it, I'm on camera, but the fact that IBM is pushing that to a lot of the enterprises, which is actually creating a lot of jobs, and therefore if you'll go, there's a lot of developer community kind of adopting Hyperledger, and maybe not because it's the best solution, but I think it's a solution that can get them jobs, or there's value at the end of going through a lot of the training. So I think in addition to developers, and I think that's kind of what you guys are also alluding is, how do we start getting more solutions out there, more offerings out there, which will then drive demand, and then it kind of gets into that flywheel of adoption.